All right, we're gonna bring the financial affairs meeting order. We'll start with a roll call, starting with Mr. Epps.
Hold on one second. Are we still recording?
Yeah, I saw that. Was you.
Okay.
Zachary Epps, present.
Ross Whiting, present. Charles Burdell Williams, present.
Leah Mulhern, present.
Jan Schultz, present.
Robin Murphy, present.
Jennifer Lohman, present.
And Henry present. Can I have a motion to approve last month's minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Leah,
Leah
second.
Mulhern.
And so I will turn it over to Mr. Schwanberg.
Thank you very much, Pam. I will get right to it. Tonight, we're going to look at the interim financial statements through the month of February. We're also going to look at, take another preview of the preliminary budget that was approved by Governor, or presented by Governor Shapiro last month on the day of the Finance Committee meeting that we didn't quite get much or any time to digest. Now we have a little more information, so we're going to take a deeper dive into that and then look at one action for board approval at next week's legislative meeting. All right, so first and foremost, looking at our balance sheet, we continue to have a strong cash position versus last year, which is helping drive our investment income. And is a sign that we're still moving in the right direction as a district in terms of fiscal responsibility and structural surplus. When we look at year-over-year revenues, it's right in line with expectations. When we look at year-over-year expenditures, having spent $84.7 million this year to date versus $76.7 versus last year to date, there are a couple areas to note as to why there's a difference, and we will review them on this page. So first and foremost, we have one extra payroll to date that we did not have last year because of the payroll cycle and some months having 3 payrolls versus some did not. So that's approximately $3 million in salaries and wages. We have some curriculum purchases coming out of this line item as well. Some of those purchases need to be allocated over future years, but right now they're all being charged to instructional expenditures. The other area that you'll see stands out is pupil services. We're currently running our PCCD mental health grants out of the pupil personnel services in the form of counselors and psychologists. So a lot of this is funded by grant money that hasn't been received yet. And that's also likewise down here under our central services category. We spent $2.3 million to date versus $1.7 last year. And that's all ESSER money, the final piece of ESSER money for smart boards for classrooms. The one item really standing out is facilities. So we had a couple very large facilities projects this year, one being the opening of EPIC, which occurred over the summer. The other being the repair and expanded maintenance on Elkins Park to make sure that building was operational and functioning through the winter. So when I look at the year-over-year difference of almost $8 million, I can immediately write off $3 million as a payroll discrepancy. And then we have a variety of other somewhat temporary and somewhat permanent items that make up that increase. Moving back up to revenue. To date, we have 2.7 million more in revenues this year versus last year. As we all know, our local source revenue is dependent on real estate taxes, and that makes up the bulk of this revenue line item increase. On the state side, we've collected most of our state revenues that were allotted to be increased for the year, including some charter school revenue, farmstead increase, and that's driving the increase in this category. So year to date, we have some timing issues that are showing an increase in expenditures, but overall, we're still looking at a structural surplus through the end of the year. Any questions on revenues and expenditures? Yes, Charles.
Just one. Related to transportation, we had that contract a little while ago, and I'm just continually have a 10% increase year over year. Was it that?
So that was a five-year contract. The first year was 10%. Subsequent. this represents roughly a 4% increase.
That's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that doesn't, that's actually pretty good
Yes,
for a transportation contract.
yes.
I've seen 15% in some of the districts.
In Montgomery County.
In Montgomery,
Yeah.
neighboring districts.
Just while we're here, this was actually, thanks for your diligence and anybody who contributed to our contract negotiation at that point. Because in our legislative committee, we were one of the few districts where transportation costs aren't ballooning from year to year, even though they are increasing for us. Like Mr. Schweiger just said, other folks are experiencing much significant and dramatic year-to-year increases.
So why is that happening in other districts and how are we getting around?
Oh, we took our lump, we had that first year of the contract, we had 10% increase, other districts saw as much as 50. So, yeah, we took our lump already, it wasn't as big as what other districts had to deal with. I think I'm guessing it was the timing of other districts, contracts expiring. COVID really forced a lot of drivers, bus drivers to either retire or move on to other options as, during the COVID years, the Amazon delivery services exploded. So, the pool of drivers has been tremendous. Of course, there's increased demand, there's increased compensation.
And I think they were renegotiating at those sometimes. Like, I think we were about a year behind or so than some other districts.
Yeah. Any other questions on the revenues, expenditures, or balance sheet? Always feel free to ask if you see a line item, you know what's in that makes up this expense and why is it moving the way it's moving.
Well, I guess on that note, since you said that, these summer alternative school, other instructional programs, I think that's going down.
So there were a lot of summer programming was funded by ESSER because there was a specific grant for after school. Ended before this year started.
So we have certain programs won't even be offered this summer.
Right. Certain weren't offered this list.
Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Do we know if we'll be able to, like, I imagine a lot of that was like trying to catch students up with that sort of.
Some of that was it. Some of it was just expanded programming for students in compensatory ed over the summer. So, since the funding was new, some of the programs were new and some of the programming that was less effective was all. As I said, looking at our structural surplus, it obviously still exists through the end of February and is still trending in the right direction. And looking at our historical revenue collection, we are showing a positive in all categories. Obviously, our increase in our real estate tax collection matches the real estate tax increase last year of 1.5%. But our earned income taxes are still strong, and our delinquent tax collection has increased, so we're pulling down that balance, which is a good sign. And of course, as the prime rate has dropped, we're slowly seeing that decrease in our earnings on investments. To note, only $1.6 million is budgeted, so we're well above that. Any questions on the local revenue? All right, if not, I'll move back to this budget Act 1 timeline that we keep focusing on every meeting. So we presented our preliminary budget. The state presented its preliminary budget. Now the next thing we wait for is the certification of property tax relief, which was in the governor's budget. And just a reminder that our state source revenue, is 21% of the district's entire revenue. So quite a significant piece, which is why we spent so much time talking about looking at what the budget is. So moving back to ancient history to 23-24, which at this point seems forever ago. we had a basic ed subsidy, and here I'm just focusing on the line items that seem to move the most through legislation. We had a basic ed subsidy of 6.8. There was no sort of charter school reimbursement subsidy. We had the special education subsidy, property tax relief of $4 million, school mental health grants of 197, and a Ready to Learn block grant of 340,000. So of these selected revenues, that's $14.5 million of state revenue. Rewind to last year's budget, there was quite a bit of money approved and placed into the basic ed subsidy, $432,000 increase. There was a brand new charter school subsidy that was introduced to the tune of almost $300,000. The special education subsidy was increased. There was more money allotted from the Homestead Fund for property tax relief, which totaled $500,000. The school mental health grant seems to be essentially level funded at this point, and the Ready to Learn block grant got an additional 1.1 million that turns out we couldn't use this year, but still was approved in the budget. And a grand total of $2.5 million allotted to Cheltenham School District through last year's state budget, which was a tremendous amount of money and historical in a sense. And we got the preliminary budget, and we were a little bit panicked. We saw there wasn't a lot of money allocated toward basic ed subsidy, and we saw that the charter school reimbursement was going away, and there was a little bit of panic, but really some of that funding was just moved to other categories. So yes, there's a 1% change in the basic ed subsidy, but that's not where most of this year's increases are focused on, or what department is being funded out of. The charter school reimbursement is going away, but that is replaced with a charter school flat funding formula of $8,000 that sounds like a broken record, has been resurrected and placed in this year's budget. It feels a little different this year. It feels like the Auditor General is piggybacking on that effort, like they're really trying to make a push, which is why they pulled this charter school subsidy reimbursement from the budget, because it feels like they're really pushing this tuition adjustment. The special education subsidy got somewhat of a normal annual increase. There is another proposal for an increase in the property tax relief payment. The fund will distribute, according to the proposed budget, in excess of $1 billion. Right now, we're at $900 million. So, it appears as if there'll be some extra money coming through property tax relief, governor's office, and more money was pushed through the Ready to Learn block grant. So that went from $340,000 to $2.5 million in 2 years. So it looks like a lot of the focus is coming through this grant, which means it's coming through the DCD's office, which I think has to do with the relationships at the cabinet. So if everything were to come true in the governor's budget, that's a $2.7 million increase. But I would just going to put a giant star next to proposed. Just kind of wanted to ease everyone's mind about what that original budget proposal looked like, where the funding appears to be targeted towards next year. Any questions on the state budget?
Let me just put a star next to the Ready to Learn block grant. Sorry, I will acknowledge, but to be honest, because we had to raise taxes, we don't know when we'll be able to access those funds. We received an increase in part because we had to raise taxes last year. So it's reflected there, but we don't know when we'll be able to receive those funds. So it's a vicious cycle. So it seems like, we talked about this before, and we even talked about this for our advocacy task force. But it's just, at a certain point, it becomes a little frustrating because it's significant funds we can receive that will only grow every year that we don't.
As an accountant, I don't like volatility.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And then when they're moving the charter reimbursement 1 year, we have it the next year, but then they move it to another place. It's just.
Well, you see things moving out of categories where it's just guaranteed funding into categories where there's required more hoops to jump. Right. It's not that we can't jump through them, but it just is a different negotiation tactic, I guess. Yes, Ross.
Confirming that the Ready to Learn block grants essentially on a year delay budget.
Is on what?
It's basically on a year delay. We have to offset its.
Well, that depends. It's because the reason this $1.1 million wasn't part of this year's revenue is because they passed the budget after we passed our budget.
Oh, okay.
So if we're required to use the money for tax relief, we've already set our tax rate.
We can use it that in that fiscal year. We can use it to come.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
So it's already built into next year's budget. Now, assuming they pass this budget, or we pass ours, and we could adopt a resolution for year end to incorporate that into our revenue for next year. And we would have, $3.7 million of regular block grant money all hitting it.
Historically, Pennsylvania has not passed a budget on June 30th, correct?
It's
Not very often.
election years, no, and non-election years. When in a good economy, and it's not an election year, it gets passed pretty easily.
Okay.
We have some more volatility.
Yes. Thank you.
Any more questions on the state budget? I guess to answer your question, Rob, I think in the 9 years I've been doing this twice. It's gone way past.
Way past the June 30th. Okay. But we're required to pass ours at the beginning of June,
That's correct. End of June, yeah, before June 30th.
before June 30th. And so essentially, unless they pass their budget early, we're essentially,
Let's pass it in May.
yeah, which we're,
The first week in June.
the timing would be very tight for us to be able to apply it to the budget.
That's correct, yeah.
Just we wouldn't be allowed or able to pass a resolution that says we are banking on it and then be able to count it if it passes. Correct.
This sounds like an NDSU question. I think you probably could.
Just food for thought.
It was all new last year, so that would be a question.
Not binding.
Resolution.
That is a good.
I'll ask, I'll raise it with offline.
Since you haven't switched the slide yet. It sounds like there is clarity, it's like, because before there wasn't even clarity, like, okay, there might be a resolution. All of that is cleared up now, like the process is clear. Okay.
Yes, yeah. I guess in theory, I don't see why exactly. Any other questions on this slide? All right, so we talked about this property tax relief money and how it grew from 4 million to 4.6 to potentially 4.9 million. So I'm predicating that increase on the governor's budget and the general property tax relief line item coming out of the homestead fund. So we have our receipts from the state gaming fund, we have our interest earnings, and then we have our property tax disbursements. So you can see this fund, the cash in this fund is growing from year to year, and therefore the allocation coming out is growing from year to year. So I'm anticipating for the proposed budget an increase based on the increase in this fund's budget. Also talked about the charter school tuition. As I said, the Auditor General Timothy D. DeFore released a performance audit of 5 cyber charter schools, most of which we participate in, and showed from 2020 to 2023, they legally increased revenues by 425, reserves by 144%, due in part to an outdated funding formula that does not use actual instruction costs to determine tuition, set guidelines for spending, or setting limits for cyber charter school reserve funds. So you can actually go on PD's website and you can pull the fund balances of every school in Pennsylvania, and you can look up the cyber charter schools fund balances. Some of the cyber charter schools fund balances are pushing $100 million at this point. So it is in essence tax money that's parked in entities with no capital expenditures. So I think that's why this is a growing issue.
They will fix it.
Not without cynicism.
Them out and appreciate it.
An outdated ball that never anticipated, I believe it's from the seventies, never anticipated, the growth in cyber charter schools that exploded during the COVID years. And I think there's a lot of politics at play.
Well, that's what I'm actually talking about the politics. What are the politics? How's that benefit? No, I know how it benefits charter schools.
Cyber charter school operators donate to certain people's campaigns.
That's what okay, you go.
Well, and cyber charters are less restrictive, like we're a public school district. We're all sitting here in public in an open meeting, answering questions from anybody who wants to answer them, but every single penny we spend. And also answering questions about how our children are educated and how they're graded, how they don't quite have the same restrictions that we do.
They don't, but theoretically, they are actually public schools. So theoretically, they should be
Compliant to.
complying with some of the same things, but.
So again, just pointing out this $8,000 flat charter school tuition has been proposed for several years and has never been adopted. But like I said, I think there's more bipartisan towards seeing how many tax dollars are essentially being parked in a bank account that can't be used while coming out of taxpayers' pockets. I think there's an increased effort to do something about it that's growing and growing. So for the 23-24 school year, just for reference, we had 130 students that live in Shelton Township that attend charter schools. 111 attended cyber charters, 111 of them. So this flat tuition, if it's passed in whole, the amount that the state calculates is roughly $1.4 million if we switched funding. All right, I think that's the last slide for the budget update. Any questions on the state budget? Seeing none, I will move to one legislative meeting agenda item. And that is, we're looking to advance purchase 1,700 Chromebooks in the amount of $563,000 that we would normally wait until July to purchase to put in next year's budget. The reason being facing a 10 to 20% tariff, definitely a 10% tariff, which is $45,000, 20% tariff, which is $90,000. So if we order it now, we can get in advance of that, but we can save money in the immediate term.
Are there other items that we should consider purchasing now?
So the biggest tariffs I think that impact the district are, there's the steel and aluminum tariff, metals. Other than if we're doing a construction project, we don't necessarily purchase a lot. The issue with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico is Canada is a large importer of oil. That's just going to impact everybody across the board, depending on how those targets are tariffed. A lot of auto parts are impacted by tariffs. Fortunately, we're out in the market buying vehicles right now. That's an issue. I mean, for instance, a 9-passenger van, because of demand and because of tariffs, when I was buying them for $29,000 a piece 2.5 years ago, and I think now they're right around 65 or 70 a piece. Agricultural products coming out of Mexico and the United States, and China, of course, has all of our technology and sports-related equipment and things we buy manufactured in China has a 10% tariff already that doesn't even seem to have any negotiation distance. So that in essence, this tariff we're trying to avoid for pricing was already announced by vendors. So we're hoping, talking about this construction bid, we're opening on the 13th,
Good note.
which is one day after the steel and aluminum tariff. But hopefully, contractors have to go out, they have to get pricing if they're going to submit a bid. Vendors have to lock in that pricing for 30 to 60 days. Hopefully we're before this tariff, we're catching this at this time. which will be the next legislative meeting agenda item. So the 18th, we'll approve that right away to lock, assuming we have a favorable bid outcome to lock that in right away. All right, any questions on the agenda item for the next board meeting?
Have a motion to adjourn?
Ask for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there any public?
Is there, any questions from the public? Anybody on the line? Hands up though. Seeing none? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can you send us all?
The meeting is adjourned.